Over the past 3 months, Drew has met with our educational council, which is comprised of the academic department heads and several academic administrators. And he's offered valuable insights into issues of leadership and communication. Participants in those sessions offered comments such as these 3. First, Drew reinforced the notion that communication is more about purpose than technique. Secondly, I like the notion that Drew offered: to change the culture, change the conversation. And finally, this observation: it's important for people to feel they matter. Negative feedback given well can be inspiring. I'm hoping I get some of that one day. In other words, Drew makes improving one's communication skills seem realistic and attainable, and who doesn't want that? I know Drew has much to share with us this evening. He's entitled his presentation, "What Do We Tell the Kids? Insights and Inspirations Toward Connection in a Wildly Disconnected World." Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Drew Kugler.
So I was trying to remember the exact month that it was, and I think it was May of 1968. I was 11 years old. I was also told in that month that I was the youngest consistent volunteer in the presidential campaign of Robert Kennedy. I went every day in my hometown of Chula Vista, California, and stuffed envelopes and walked precincts like we used to do in volunteering to help in politics. And one night, I came home and I got into an argument with my dad. Because for the life of me, as hard as I was working on the presidency for Senator Kennedy, my dad just didn't see it that way. But after all, he was my dad, and to this day, 91 years old, still my dad. And he was an avid, equal supporter of Senator Eugene McCarthy. So back and forth we went. He was telling me why Senator Kennedy was didn't spend long enough as an attorney general, and he was, benefited by his family and all the rest. And I had some weird point about I liked the way that he combed his hair. But the important part of that moment back in those months was that I disagreed with my dad. And even more important than the disagreement was the very clear memory I have of the conversations that we had where my dad told me in no uncertain terms, even in the limited moments that an 11-year-old could have with his dad, that it was the right thing for me to disagree on one condition, is that we were respectful in our disagreement. And that's what mattered most. It didn't matter who was right or who was wrong, but it was how we treated each other, not only about politics, but in our home. Now, why do I indulge you in a story that old? Because there is a driving question to tonight's presentation that I want and I invite you to begin to ponder. And that is, what are your children, your daughters, and even your sons learning from you about what is important in communicating? What are they taking away from the conversations, as rare as they may be, as we'll indulge in a little bit later. But what are our kids learning? But more importantly than that, the other point that overrides all of this is if you look around, with the exception of one young lady I met earlier, there are no kids here tonight. So if I'm going to stick to a consistent rule that I bring in my client work, is that I only believe that people can change when you talk about the people in the room, not people outside. We spend far too much time, money, and energy in our work with our kids, with our peers, with our work in the employment world, spending lots of very valuable capital in talking about things that you can't change because the people who you want to change aren't in the room. So what I would like you to consider for at least the next little while that we have here is that this speech, despite the title of What Do We Tell the Kids?, this speech tonight is not about your daughters. This speech is about you. Just indulge me in that till the end. And then you very likely, as most human beings do, will continue along your way. But my very clear intention tonight, and in all the work that Barbara was nice enough to tell you a little bit about, is that the people that can change are the people right in front of me. So is there opportunities to influence your daughters in other ways? Through some sort of learning which takes place in these hallways or in other things that they see? Absolutely. But tonight is not in any way intended to do that. It is intended to have you think about you. So with that in mind, what was it my dad was doing? My dad was trying to express himself on something he felt important. Something he admitted to me that he didn't get a lot of when he was a kid, but that he really wanted me to know was important to think about. But the interesting thing in the way that he did it was that he didn't tell me what to do. We actually, in a very admitted, limited way, had a real conversation about it. Now, I wanted to go out and play. I was distracted by the things of the day. I wanted to go down and work in the headquarters or do my homework or watch Marcia Brady or whatever it was. But he decided that that conversation was important enough. So obviously the underpinning point here tonight is what conversation is important enough for you that you feel the need to succeed at. Because as we will explore here, we don't have that many chances. We are in great competition against many factors in this world, but that will obviously be something I will touch on as I go. But what I don't want you to lose track of, at least as I said, consider until we step out, as to the indelible mark that your behavior, even to this day, regardless of the age of your daughter, the indelible mark that your actions have. Now, admittedly, I get lots of parents sitting on airplanes as I go to my work who bemoan how difficult it is, how indeed the competition feels often way too great against those things in their hand. We're just losing the battle, many people tell me. So it makes the case for tonight even a stronger one. Because what is it going to take to be able to, in essence, compete, to distinguish yourself as an individual against the multiple distractions that not only they have in their lives, but remember what the theme is tonight, the distractions that you have. You are just, and I say this only lightly, you are just as distracted and pulled and interrupted and at times lost as much, if not more, than they are. So what do we begin to do about that? I wonder, and more importantly, do you wonder, what do your kids think about how you communicate? What I'm hoping is I take these obvious pauses and ask these questions. I can tell you pretty clearly that the quality of tonight's time that you're expending will be determined by the conversation that you are having with yourself right about there. That indeed the most important communication that we engage in our lives is not communication with other people, but in the conversations we have with ourselves. So I really wonder if you really asked your kids, had even that split moment to create a conversation, what they would tell you of how they perceive what you do in trying to carry on these conversations with them. I put that out for another thought. All right. So let's be clear about what we're up against first. We are truly up against two distinctive factors that raise the bar of tonight's thoughts. Factor number one, no matter how we wish it was different, time is passing. So the window of just time with them is factually getting smaller. Now, many of us, all of us, at times wish we could change that, but we can't. Former coach of the Lakers, Coach Jackson, used to say that there is a grand distinction between wishing and accepting. When we wish, we get angry and we get fearful. But when we accept the reality that we face, we start hopefully engaging in what he calls, in Eastern thinking, calls right action. The things that benefit us and those people around us. So, easy takeaway from tonight is to test your acceptance, not holding to the wish that it wasn't going, or bemoaning the fact that it is going and wishing that somehow it would go slower. The fact of the matter is, if we can accept and be present where we are with them, that begins to set the stage for the right kind of conversations. But the second reason that draws us tonight is what I referred to earlier as this competition that we are in. Let's call it for what it is. We are in a battle against distraction. Our own, and the ones that come easily to mind and that are so popular in talking to people and preparing for this speech. One faculty member told me of the story of sitting in a restaurant and just looking across an entire families with their faces on their screens during a meal. You know that family. You may very well be in that family. And that's concerning. You're up against that. Here's an even better way that I heard it put. I teach a summer class at USC in collaborative communication. And we were sitting in a faculty meeting, listening to faculty try to come up with rules of conduct in class for these students. And this one faculty member insisted that the use of laptops be banned from the class. Be banned. Why? Because they weren't paying attention. He actually heard, with shock in his voice, that there were students in his class that were ordering shoes on the internet during his lecture. And I raised my hand as politely as I could. and suggested to him, and I suggest to you in this competition, maybe it's not the shoes. He wasn't so crazy about that suggestion because what he felt he had to say was important and they needed to respect him as a faculty member, and it was disrespectful for people to stare at their screens. And all I politely suggested and re-suggest this evening, and I'm, by the way, completely okay that you don't agree. I welcome you at least to weigh the argument. How much of your daughter's inattention and attention toward the screen is not about the shoes, and it's about the teacher? If you simply run that math, it's healthy thinking. Are you doing every single thing, as we will outline in specifics later, every single thing you can do to compete effectively? I've got 6 ideas at the end. Any one of them has made a difference in the organizations I've gone to and the families that I've listened to, and in our family. So, I always wonder, though, when I get about to this point, why you're here. I mean, you come to hear, you read about this guy who does this coaching, and he's got 2 daughters, and as we said, Barbara's introduction, I liked how it sounded. It sounded like, it felt right, you know, that's what I get to do. But I always want to share this one story about taking advice. And again, run it for yourself. That's what tonight is about. My wife and I were on a vacation with our family many years ago for her father's birthday. And we were in Hawaii on a boat. And on that boat was our entire family because Lisa's father's name is Marv, and he had turned a big age. So we were out on this boat all wearing our T-shirts. It's Marv's birthday. Come on, you've worn them too, right? And there we were floating out off the beach in Maui. And I looked over at my sister-in-law, and she was looking rather, as my late mother would say, peaked. And it was pretty clear that Karen was going to get sick. But the moment that is most important is the thing that happened next. Because Karen stood up to go to the rail, and her other sister stepped in her way and said to her in no uncertain terms the following: I told you to take the Dramamine before we left the shore. Why didn't you take the Dramamine? I tell that story with one point in mind as I get to some of the things that I've learned and that I offer for you, is only give advice when asked. Don't try to give advice to people who don't want to hear it. That has served me well in my work, and it certainly, as our daughters grow, our children grow, if nothing else that you take away, but to be careful and to test at some level the willingness to listen, or are they on their way to the rail, makes a big difference in the advice that I have tonight and the advice that I would like you to think about going forward. Don't get in their way, especially if they don't want to hear it. So, Barbara mentioned 30 years. 30 years of teaching, about 15 years now as a sole proprietor. You have the whole company in front of you. It travels around the world and sits with senior level executives and professionals, senior administrators of schools, senior executives and professionals in temples, in churches, and hospitals. The list goes on, and they are all telling me the same thing. They are struggling and struggle every day to connect in a genuine way with the people that they work with. And what even makes it more difficult in the struggle to connect, what even makes it more difficult is that the pace of change around them is just continuing to quicken. So what got them to there is not getting them to where they need to go. And they are, in essence, not only stuck, not knowing what to do, but they likely fall into a set of habits and a set of choices which may have served them well when the climb up the mountain was different. But now the air is thinning, so they really don't know what to do. And what they say to me is, why can't these people just get it? Why can't they just change and work different? So as I was writing all this experience out and thinking about that, it has continuously dawned on me that why do we draw a distinction between what it takes to influence people in an organization, in a place that we care about working and changing? Why can't we learn from that in helping us be better parents? And the more that I read about what makes a good leader, it was almost like you could cross the word out and put in parent. It really is, as I work through some of this tonight in the advice, it is grounded very deeply in that 30 years of working with older folks, but it just isn't that different. So for the sake of this evening, as we go and we're thinking about this, I suggest that you look for answers in places that you might not have looked for before, unless everything's going great. If everything was going great and you weren't looking to improve yourself, to make it better, you likely, all due respect, wouldn't be here tonight. There's something about this topic that pulled you here. Maybe your spouse said, let's go. The point of the matter is, I think the answer lies in the experience of our work. And that's what I'm grounding a lot of this in tonight. So, I want to be real clear on a couple very straightforward points that maybe you haven't thought of as to why tonight matters. That's the next point. Why tonight matters. Point number one. The senior people in an organization, by all research and common sense, many of which maybe that's you, the senior people in an organization have been researched greatly. Thousands, likely hundreds of thousands of pages written around the effect of your behavior on the culture in which you work. It's many wonderful books on the subject, but a gentleman up at Stanford by the name of Bob Sutton wrote a book called Good Boss, Bad Boss that I think is completely spot on to parenting. Here's what it says. The more senior we are, the older we are, seen as someone of wisdom or experience, whether or not we like it, the people pay more attention to us. We may not think that they are paying attention, but they are. So we have this, point number one is we have this outsized influence on our families as parents by nature. I can't help but get out of my mind the advice a friend asked when we were first pregnant. He says, Drew, just remember this. They may not listen, but they always watch. Ow. They may not listen, but they always watch. And that's what the research on leadership says. Is we get so busy in our day, we get so into what we have to accomplish and how full our plate is and how we're slammed and we're crazy busy. Do you understand? Do you even begin to comprehend, if you just pause for a moment, the outsized effect that has on the people around you, let alone those who you are responsible for influencing not only how they are as kids, but how they will be as grown-ups. That's the other reason that it is so important. And parent after parent, executive after executive I get to talk don't seem to get this, which put me into this really impassioned part of the work I have found, is understanding, and very clearly, we are mispreparing our children to be successful in the world by how we often communicate. Let me repeat that. We are often mispreparing our children. We are preparing them. I mean, haven't you read all about science and technology and the education that they get at school? All the investment in their future. But where are they learning to connect? And I believe because of the outsized influence that we as parents can hold, that it is, depending how you look at it, a terrible waste, often, or on top of that, a tremendous opportunity where we can use that outsized influence not only to influence them today, but to influence them years from now. That's the interesting, if I think, as I was thinking about the story about my dad and Bobby, that work that I'm describing that I do came from that conversation. Because the work in this organization that I've been lucky enough to try to help out a little bit, the work from day to day is underpinned by the question of, if we can as people respectfully connect, even in times of disagreement, we are going to have stronger organizations, we are going to have stronger charities, we are going to have stronger schools, the list goes on and on. So that little conversation that many years ago set the basis for what I believe and what I am sharing this evening. So the question still remains for you to think about, what am I doing today as a parent that years from now could be remembered? That is why tonight, and the thinking that you are engaging in, that I've invited you to think about, matters so darn much. The stakes are so high, folks. We can talk and we can play off the media's easy points. What is it? We're leaving them a messed up economy. We're leaving them a messed up climate, and the list goes on, and all of it is correct. But if we cannot help prepare our children to have the right conversations about those problems with each other, with their schools, with their elected officials, around the dinner table, if we cannot influence those conversations, what are we doing? That's where the mispreparation point comes in. With all due respect to this fine institution, I'm telling you, from school to school, if that's what you're thinking, oh, they'll get it at school. School is not enough. No matter all of the efforts they're making here with the strategic planning and the quest for excellence and all of the rest, it is admirable, and this school is definitively committed to that. And I can tell you that as an outside observer and an expert who watches that. This place is all in on that. But it is not enough. That's where it comes back to who's in the room tonight. That's why tonight's important. And the last point as to why it's important before I get to the specific examples. The last point is this human connection idea. This actual point where you and I'm looking at people, and you all, a lot of you at least appear to be listening. This is impossible on email. This is impossible on text. This is impossible any other way than conversation. So as you think about this, and I know I'm throwing a lot to think about, that when you really step back from it, it can be rather momentous. But that's what's on the line here. Remember when the guy was mad about the shoes? That says a lot. That says a lot about how we are approaching very rare moments of true connection. As I said, coming up in just a couple minutes is an idea of very specific things that you should be, in essence, testing yourself against tonight that work. Because as much as I hear myself in my head talking about the real challenges we face and the times that we are mispreparing, the times that we underconnect, there are specific ways with that very narrow window that we have. There are ways if you look for them. All too often, the challenge really is that we get in our own way. That's what's really on the line tonight. I went to do a presentation and work with a group at they're happy to own my work, so to speak, at HBO. And the guy comes up to me and he says, look, I've read all the books, rented all the DVDs. You got to come with something new. Do you have something new? Because we're just communicating for blank. And we're losing money, and we're losing time, and I don't like coming to work. Can you imagine how he's like at home? So he says to me, you got to come up with something new. And I said, sir, I just met him, just like that day at the lunch. And I said, you're not really going to like it because there is nothing new. Shakespeare figured it out a long time ago. The fault lies not in our stars, but in ourselves. He didn't like that much. But as we'll find here in a few minutes, if you take some time to look at yourself, you may find some workable answers. That's why I made the point of working with you tonight and not your girls. Not the girls. Because the fact is, no matter what you do tonight or tomorrow or the next day, they are paying attention. We are modeling the way. The question is how intentional and deliberate are you about that? One of my favorite writers, and with complete bias, a friend and a client, is a gentleman by the name of Atul Gawande. Atul is the medical writer for The New Yorker, and a very talented, does interesting surgical work, and wrote a book called Better. And Dr. Gawande summarized it perfectly when I start to get to the point about advice and giving you specific suggestions of what you can do, because you're getting to that point where you're going, okay, I'm with you, Drew. What do I do? And I promise we are moments from there. But he says there are 3 things that make you better. And they are unnegotiable. Number 1, whatever you are going to choose to get better at, you must be first diligent about it. Not just go to some speech that some guy talks about, and you go, yeah, I really got to work on that. That's really good. I'm going to buy that book. And anyway, number 1, you have to establish a diligent practice. The Malcolm Gladwell research that everybody has touched on, at 10,000 hours at anything, you become a genius. But the heart of that is practice matters the most, a diligence. Step number 2, what he says is a sense, and this one's easy with kids, moral clarity, that we are doing it for the right reasons, not just for the money. Now, his study was of doctors who do better treatment of patients. They are diligent. They stay longer than the insurance pays them. because they are morally committed to getting things better. But lastly, and it sets up our specific ideas, lastly, he says the most important thing to get better at something is to have a level of what he calls ingenuity, doing something new. Because change only comes from trying new things. My great discomfort in listening to most parents that we have dinner with or sit around is they just keep trying to do the same thing over and over again, somehow hoping that it'll work. Yanking on a locked door of a room, and I figure if I yank hard enough, I'll open it. It is ingenuity. It is trying new things that is the third part of the stool of getting better. So what do you do about that? Let's get to the specifics. I'll outline a little bit and open it up to questions. At the end of the book, Better, they reprint a speech that Dr. Gawande gave at Harvard Medical School, where he told the story that I want to couch all of these solutions in. Because some people will say to me in critique of my style, is that sometimes it's too negative. Is that we should talk about things that go right. And you know what? That is where the answer lies. The first ingenious thing that you can do is start to wrestle with a concept started back at Tufts University years ago by a doctor by the name of Jerry Sternin, who's a late professor of nutrition at Tufts. He and his wife were fascinated and wanted to do good in Vietnam with the problem of malnutrition. So Dr. Sternin set about a study of malnutrition in Vietnam, not by going to study the malnourished, but by studying those who were able to find a good diet. He called it the notion of positive deviance. Who, in the face of dysfunction, can find, in essence, the good news? So what I would want you to start to think about tonight is to learn from the people and the ideas that I'm going to share, that I find in organizations that are positive deviation, the behaviors that make a productive difference, not one that bemoans the problem, but that actually works in the face of the problem. They went to Vietnam and studied the healthy eating families and listened to them about how they can pull it off in the face of such nutritional deprivation. And they listened to people. How do you do it? Well, I'm going to tell you how people do it. And I'm going to be specific as heck, because you know what? Half the challenge that we face in improving our communication is we are far too unspecific. We say we have a communication issue with our kids or at work, but we leave it at that. As one motivational guy once said, it is far better to be a meaningful specific than a wandering generality. All too often our discussion with our kids and about our kids is in the pursuit of wandering generality rather than specifying actions to take. So I'm about to tell you what works and invite you to take it on yourself. All couched under one idea. Jim Collins is the author of the best-selling business book of all time, called From Good to Great. And he studied leaders at the top of their organizations who were able to compete in dire circumstances of competition. And he found one unifying action that each of those leaders was absolutely committed to. And Mr. Collins referred to it as understanding the difference between the mirror and the window. The mirror and the window. And when to look at each one. Let me explain, because each of these suggestions is in the mirror. Here's what he said. The best leaders knew that when something was going wrong, that they needed to look one place. Where was that? The best leaders. The mirror. Why? It was in that place that change was possible. And only that place. It had to start in the mirror. Where do you believe the bad leader, bad parent, struggling parent, where do you think they are looking when the struggle goes on with the kid? Out the window. And out the window is where the leader could apportion blame. On the phones, on the screens, on the friends, on the school, on the economy. Does it at all sound familiar? You probably would only admit that it does if you look in the mirror. So, what is the window for, though? Why would the good leader look out the window? Because Mr. Collins found in his research that when you can, as we'll say later, look ahead, look out, you can find new opportunities. You can find new ways. Coming tonight is looking out the window. Now, we can counterbalance the two with these specific suggestions. You are beginning to embrace the idea that it is about you, not even the person to your left or to your right, let alone your daughter at home. It is about what you see in front of you. So very specific suggestion number one as we look in the mirror. And I'll put it in the form of a question. Do you ask more than you tell? Do you ask on balance? Do you ask more than you tell? As simple as that sound, I am telling you, it is a rarity in the organizations that call me. It's probably because I mostly get called to places that struggle. I admit that. As the saying goes, to the worm in horseradish, everything is horseradish. So I see this all the time. I just don't see a lot of real curiosity on people's behalf. How much curiosity do you extend to your daughter? Whether or not, quite admittedly, it's returned, or they have the patience to actually answer the question. But suggestion number one, when we look for opportunities that we have as individuals, is that on our scale of the opportunities we get, are we asking more than we're telling? That's specific suggestion number one. Number two, the cousin of that comment, but very important. Are you listening more than you talk? Are you listening more than you are talking? Remembering that this is from the 30-year vantage point, that when I can sit and watch people who are curious and patient, even when it's difficult, those are the people that find a greater connection with their cause, find a deeper connection with the people around them, and are able to get people to do what maybe they didn't believe they could. To me, that starts to sound an awful lot like really cool parenting, because they listen more than they talk. Gladwell put out some really interesting research. It wasn't his, but a couple books ago. Do I have any, and this is not an emergency question, but do I have any doctors here? Here's what the research says on malpractice. How's that for an entry, right? The research on malpractice, on why one doctor would get sued and another doctor who makes a similar kind of mistake doesn't get sued, they actually research that question to try to distinguish what went on different that lowered the chances that the doctor would be sued. And they were only able to bring it down to one point. They were seen to listen more. They were seen to spend more time in curiosity in how the person felt. What would your daughter say about your genuine level of patience and curiosity and listening if you can put your shoulders back and say, I'm killing it there, I am doing really well, then you are being extremely respectful to this point by not looking like, okay, I got it. Because we don't. Let alone the distractions. To be able to focus on the needs of another, especially as they get older, is increasingly more difficult. But the scale remains the same. Can you listen more than you talk? If you summarize those two tips alone, they're very difficult. You then tap into, to me, probably something for the educators who are here tonight, something they've heard a lot. But you're getting to the essence of a significant change that is taking place in many, many colleges that your kids want to end up in. One specific, 2 years ago, an article in Harvard Magazine came out entitled very succinctly, The Death of the Lecture. The Death of the Lecture, and it found the following. A physics professor at Harvard discovered something, that the kids, though that they could learn the concepts and memorize the concepts of physics, they couldn't make a practical application. And what he hypothesized was that the reason that they weren't really learning, really taking it in and applying it to their life was the way that they were communicating with him or not communicating with him about the concepts. And here's what he did. He flipped the classic word in education. He flipped the classroom. So you went home and you watched the lecture on a video. That was your homework, was to watch. But the work in the class was to talk to each other. And comprehension and application of the physics properties went significantly higher once he stopped talking so much. Harvard is now revisiting in many, many departments, among other schools, this notion that we have to stop telling, or at least be more strategic about it. And the suggestion and the application to you is exactly the same. At least I invite you to consider that. Because if you're able to do that, you're now up to the hardest part, in my opinion, the hardest suggestion. In 2004, I got to write an article for the American Lawyer magazine called Constructive Candor. And in Constructive Candor, which is about not only being able to deliver feedback to someone, but being able to listen to their response. As I told the lawyers, it's not only about being blunt, it's about a conversation. I began the article by talking about one of, obviously, my favorite subjects, and that's my daughter, Alexandra. Alexandra was 6 then, 5 or 6. And she came up to me one day, and on her wrist, she had a Dora the Explorer Band-Aid. And she said to me, "Daddy, would you tear the Band-Aid off?" I said, "Sure." When your 6-year-old asks you for help, we tend to show up. And as I went to reach for the Dora the Explorer Band-Aid, she said, "Hold it. Make sure you tear it fast, because when you tear it slow, it hurts more." My third suggestion is the people who are best in influencing those around them have learned to pull the Band-Aid in the right way. To, in essence, engage in the right conversation, no matter how hard it may be, no matter how it feels that it needs to remain unsaid, that pulling the Band-Aid is the ultimate in connection with another person. I can tell you that we're not very good at that. We're not very good. We can probably ignore things. We can probably even complain to our friends about it who will listen empathetically. We might even be able to go in and let the person have it right to their face if we're angry enough. But how good are we once we have pulled that Band-Aid about the issue? How good are we at sticking around and creating a sustainable conversation about it? That comprised this notion of constructive candor. And in all my work, when I told my most valuable clients about tonight, they said, the one thing that you have taught me, right, is this notion of pulling the Band-Aid and sticking around. And all I'm asking you to do, and you've probably already got this down a bit, is auditing yourself against these ideas. Given the importance of the situation that we gathered for tonight, how good are you at pulling the Band-Aid? Because you know if someone had something, if your daughter wanted to tell you something, you want her to tell you. You want her to pull the Band-Aid. That's what my father was telling me. Disagree. Say the hard thing respectfully. That, to me, is the key. But when you're doing that, I give you two more suggestions. Watch your language. The title tonight, what do we tell the kids? The one thing you've got to tell the kids is what Barney taught us. Magic words. Use your magic words. They use them so rarely at work. Thank you. Please. I really appreciate that. You did a really good job. Or in the case like Barbara was referring to at the top, if you have to say something negative, say it in a way that makes people believe that they have a chance to work on it. And push them as your daughters, not as your employees, but as your daughters, to think creatively about what the potential solutions are. Find a positive, deviant way to do it. But use the right words. Because you know people don't do it that much with you. But we owe a better version to our girls. One other easy suggestion on language. Just for the fun of it, don't use the word don't. Lose the word don't. You know why? Because here's what the psychology says. If you tell someone to not do something, the way that the brain makes pictures is you are forcing the person that you are saying don't to envision the action of negativity, of badness, and then erase it from their brain. Strive to put it in something that they can do. For those golfers in here, which is the way that, gosh knows, I need every suggestion in that game that I could possibly get. But the worst thing you can say to yourself with 150 yards of water in front of you is don't hit it in the water. What does your brain say? See, that's the last point in terms of language. Be careful. Watch your language. Because words to people make movies. The movies we run in our head are from the language that we choose. And that is the important language to watch. Last suggestion before I conclude. In the best leadership research, which I've had a chance, as Barbara was saying, to share here a little bit, is the notion of being forward-looking, of looking ahead. The research says over years and years of what is it that people are willing to follow, of people that they are looking to for guidance, aside from them keeping their word, the most important thing you can do is be forward-looking. So how often do you struggle and say to your daughter or say to anyone that you're trying to influence, well, what you should have done was, why didn't you? That is backward-looking. And there's nothing that they can really do. It certainly is not coming off as a genuine question. But as I read in this one biography, it's okay to look in the past. Just don't stare. All too often, we end up staring with our language. And what I have suggested by asking more than you can tell, listening more than you talk, pulling the Band-Aid, watching your language and looking ahead, are 5 very specific things that admittedly you will only see if you look in that mirror. In that one place you can change. I conclude with one thought. You don't have to do any of this. There is no have to here. You actually have the choice to not change, to not get better. And to say, you know what, he sounded pretty good and it was interesting. That's too hard. Takes too much time. She's not going to listen. You can run all of that language, so don't change. But as President Kennedy said many years ago on trying to make people believe we could get to the moon, he said, with any course of action, there are risks. Any course of new action, there are risks. But before you decide to take that risk, weigh the costs of inaction. So go ahead, folks. Don't do it. Say that it's too hard. Say that it takes too much time. Say that you're losing out to the dang smartphone. But understand that there is a huge cost to that inaction. So back to my dad. Many years later, if you haven't figured it out by now, this is the way that I remember. This is the way I remember the woman he was married to, who taught me that the harder that something is to do, the more important it is to figure out a way to do it. That is an unbreakable link, and it is hard. It was Jerry Seinfeld who will conclude my evening for me when he said that the blessing in life is when you find the torture that you are comfortable with. That is parenthood. Thank you very much. What are your questions? Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask you just, you started out the talk about respect and how, the conversations with father, you each respect each other's opinion. You look now, and God, I was watching the other day when, a journalist who I respect was just filling out this disgust, just talking about another politician. It's horrible. I mean, nobody, you just cannot find respect in the institutions that you used to respect. So how could that happen again? Because I don't,
How could what happen?
when you talk about having a respectful conversation, right? You go into these situations where you have an opinion, and if more people have a different opinion, they're always telling, it's always you're bad, you're wrong, and you see it everywhere.
That's right. And you have to acknowledge that that's what happens, and you can bemoan very easily. That is low-hanging fruit to complain about the media and the adversarial nature, the professional wrestling of talk shows, right? That doesn't get us anywhere, though, in our important relationships, except to acknowledge it. I often think, and I don't mean to be flippant about this, but I often think of the older saying, right? Are you going to light a candle, or are you going to curse the darkness? Which one? Trust me, the media is not going to get any better.
It is only going to stay like this or get worse because people are watching. But you don't have to. As the saying goes, just because you can see it doesn't mean you need to look. Don't look so. And talk to your kids about it. Yes?
Well, I remember during the time I grew up, we at the same time as you grew up, there wasn't so much demand for entertainment, interaction, and communication. But now, even the smartphones, the conversation is about, everything is about entertainment. The action between you, the teacher, textbooks now, they are more entertaining. They are more entertaining features even than my textbook.
Right.
So how far are you going to go with that, and how are you going to cope with that when you need to communicate? When the quality of the communication is about entertainment,
Right.
sensationalism, and if that's not there, then everything is boring.
Well,
that's what
that-
it's ending up to be.
That's where we diverge in our agreement. I don't think, I mean, if you think about sort of any good moment that you had tonight, I wasn't here to entertain. That's my first thought, right? I was here to share something from a sincere place of trying to be helpful, right? It's what I get to do for a living, so I think about that every day. How do I compete with the emails and all the rest? Most of the stuff at work is not that entertaining. There's a book, as a matter of fact, there's a book called Death by Meeting, which actually says that the way that you can make meetings interesting is by having some drama, or in essence, something worth paying attention to. Where we don't agree is that it has to be entertaining. What it has to be is you have to have somebody who cares about what they're saying, number one, and number two, acts in a way that engages the people around them. The reason that they are on the phone, I think, is the reason those people are ordering the shoes in that class, is because it's more interesting. It's more engaging.
So that's entertaining, that's exactly where it
Well-
drove me to that, because your suggestion to the other teacher was that maybe it's not the shoes, because he's not interested enough to catch the attention of
Right.
the student. So that's why the student at the same time was.
Was on the laptop, right?
Because the teacher wasn't entertaining him enough.
Here's what it comes down to, and I got limited time here. What it comes down to is how engaging, and it's language again, right? How engaging are you with your daughter in conversation? How, even in the limited time, how much are you listening? How much are you asking? How much are you making it interesting, inspiring even, pulling the Band-Aid? If you can do that, it isn't important to be entertaining. She's gonna go to Vine for that. And you're not gonna beat Vine. You just want your moments. But you've gotta deliver in that moment and not be blaming what you can't do. That's what it comes down to. I don't mean you, I mean this to every single person.
Drew,
Yes?
our daughter pulled I had a Band-Aid on the other night, and our daughter pulled it.
Yep.
Do you have any suggestions as to how one goes about not screaming?
No, I really don't. Sometimes it hurts. But the point of the Band-Aid, I don't want you to lose sight of is if you pull fast or slow, the metaphor of that, do you stick around when it's done?
Oh, hell yeah, but I didn't know what to say.
Well, sometimes I got taught that sometimes the best communication, I'm gonna riff here for a second, the best communication that you can participate in or deliver is to say nothing. How often do you not respond? How often do you not engage and have to have the last word? Sometimes pausing. Dr. Gawande, remember the guy I was talking about before? He says the most important thing that happens in a surgery is when they stop for a second and just check with each other and not feel like they have to do it. Pausing, quiet. We are losing our quiet.
It's a wonderful speech on TED by a woman named Sherry Turkle, Terkle, which I cannot do justice to, but makes the case that where we're really all afraid is to be alone. Is to be alone. So we go to this because it's our friend. And our kids feel like that too. Just offer them another connection in a way that values them and respects them. Sir, how much time do I have? 5? Yes.
You said, are you listening more than you talk? And she doesn't want to tell me anything.
I know.
So I try not to tell her too much if I can avoid it, but
Right.
I have to tell her some things
Yeah.
sometimes.
Like
This
what?
is when you have to be picked up. This is when.
Right.
And it sometimes leads to kind of,
Exactly.
someone else will take care of it.
Right.
Who's gonna go get her?
And she's gonna, and they're going to do that, and no speech or expert or book or anything is going to stop them. The question is, in the face of those so deeply challenging moments, do you still keep hope that you will find some moments of connection? And when you do get those moments, by asking, by telling, by being interested, and not in the kinds of ways that she responds, can you connect? And I know that is that might not have been the answer you were hoping for, but in a certain age range, that is the best we can do. And going back to Coach Jackson, accepting that a little bit for the time that it is, as hard as it is, and I can hear my wife and me sitting here thinking about those moments when they're just not very nice. And that's a kind word.
I'm dying to hear.
Right.
And it's like,
You want to
I
hear?
think I need to know.
No, she doesn't, and she's not going to tell you. And there's no, if anyone could come up with a way, they would have already mastered that drug, and we wouldn't be here. So I would be doing you a disservice by saying, well, all you got to do is these 3 things. Because remember, folks, the really important stuff that matters is just so dang hard. Those are the moments that you have to capture. That's the hard part. And keep a view on the long part. It's so hard.
If you had the girls in the room instead,
Mhm.
what would you be saying?
I'd say hello. No. I thought about that because I've had those opportunities. Here's what I did. I had one speech, admittedly 4th and 5th graders, who had just come back from recess. And 35 minutes for Marissa's dad to come in and talk about how to give a good speech. And all I did, back to the point of being interesting, all I did was ask them what they wanted to be when they were going to grow up. And I went around, and this young lady wanted to be actor, doctor, producer, and everything else. And that guy right there wanted to be blah, blah, blah. And by the time I got to the end, every single person was aspiring for a profession where communication mattered, where they were going to have to figure out a way to connect with people and get them to try to somehow pay attention. So what I would do with the girls is find out what they really care about for their lives. Not for right now, because I know it's about Mr. Bieber. I know it's about things that I cannot, and my wife, no one can possibly compete with. But I would try to find out what they care about. So what would I do? Given the opportunity to talk to girls here, I would ask questions. And I guarantee I'd get one kid to talk. And if I can get one, and we can play that up, I got a shot. And that's all I'm saying. I would take my own advice. And with a group like that, you have no other choice.
I like to call it your pearls of progress, if I can.
Sure, please.
But in terms of percentage, based on your years of experience, how much of a percentage of opportunity for pearls of progress do you think we all have as parents?
The honest to truth answer is I don't know the number. They're not many. So that's why my answer is they're rare. So I had a moment. I have a moment every once in a while. But here's the moment that comes to mind for me. You all have the moment in your head. But I had a very formal one. I got to give a speech to my daughters at their bat mitzvah. And last time, and I even blogged it like the other day because it was such an important quote to me, is that Bruce Springsteen, who I, for many reasons, come close to idolizing, he said something that I got to say to Marissa, the younger one. And that was, parents have to give everything they can because the world is going to do its thing pretty soon. And so when I said that, I remembered that, and she looked at me. And your daughter looks at you, all my friends here, all their daughters look at them, but they are not many. That's what is at stake here. That's why we're here tonight, is for those moments to be as good as we can, but don't talk so much. That's the real counterintuitive point. But that's how we got taught. We got taught in a school system that sit down and we're going to tell you what to do. That's the death of the lecture piece I was talking about. So counterintuitively, and as hard as it is, teach your kid to listen. Teach your kid to ask more than tell. And then maybe they'll talk about you a few decades from now. Hopefully. They're going to anyway. One more question, and I'll stick around, I promise. Sir?
So what are the milestones or signs that things are going well? And it's going the right way?
I know mine. I did it last night. Girls go in the room to do their homework. Yes. And all I do, and Lisa does the same thing, all we do is just check on them, and I'll go as far as taking the moment where I go in and I sit down on the bed. I knock on the door, and I just sit down. And Alexander says to me, "What do you want?" And I say, with that state of mind, right, because that's a moment, I say, "Nothing. Just sitting." "Okay, well, I got a lot of homework." And then somehow it came, "So how was your day?" So I told her, and then I left. Because that's the moment. You have to nail the moment. So what are the milestones? When there is some conversation. When there is some listening. Just like when they were littler, and just like, trust me, I'm 56 years old, and I still think about my mom and dad. So we matter, folks, and we always will. My in-laws play a large part in my family. We pay a lot of attention to what they have to say. So the moments, I don't know how else better to put it, the pearls of progress. If you came tonight on how to make more, I don't exactly have the answer. I'm saying take those that you have. Take those that you have and deliver in a way where you are there for them with the listening and with the asking. And you will find more along the way. Will it be enough? Probably not. And anyone who tells you that it's easy, I wouldn't believe you. 8:27. Thank you all very much.